78 kilometers of earth. Dug by men with calloused hands, women carrying water, and boys too young to remember a full harvest. No IMF money, no Western machines, only shovels, sweat, and time. In Burkina Faso, a landlocked country on the Sahel's dry edge, they built what others said could not be built. A canal cut from the Bagre Dam in the north toward the fields of the south, a line in the ground to turn dust into grain. For years, every blueprint arrived with conditions, loans, advisors, interest, signatures set in foreign tongues. Plans paused, hopes thinned. This time, the order was different. Captain Ibrahim Traoré told his people to build with what they had: Burkinabe engineers, Burkinabe crews, Burkinabe funds. No foreign debt. No foreign flag. Villagers came first, then students with survey poles, then soldiers with spades. They worked under heat that split the day in two. Walls caved and were rebuilt. Machinery broke and was fixed. The trench kept its line. One morning the test gate opened. Water slid forward, slow at first, then sure. Old men took off their hats. Women cried in quiet. Children ran beside the current, touching it like fire they could not be burned by. There were no speeches, no banners, only the sound of water finding its own level and the sight of faces loosening after long years of waiting. For the first time in a long time, a small country had turned its thirst into strength. And far beyond the ditch, on cables and phones, the news began to move. But power never sleeps. When the water began to flow, something else began to move. At dawn, the red earth still held the night's cold. Men gathered quietly, their breath white in the half-light. Farmers, students, soldiers, each carried a shovel, a pick, or nothing but their hands. They lined up along the valley that led from the Bagre Dam to the south, where the land turns green for only a few months each year. The plan was simple. Dig 78 kilometers of canal, wide enough to feed the fields and deep enough to remember the rain. No foreign companies, no consultants from Europe. Every meter would be measured and marked by Burkinabe engineers. The budget, $43 million, came from inside the country. No IMF signatures, no aid contracts written in English. The money moved like the work itself, straight, visible, and slow. The soil fought back. Walls caved, sections flooded, machinery broke. In the heat, diesel ran low, and some men fainted under the sun. Still, the crews returned each dawn. They fixed what failed, rebuilt what fell, and learned as they went. When a storm washed out a section, they dug it again. No speeches, no cameras, only work. One afternoon, an old woman arrived from a nearby village carrying millet cakes wrapped in cloth. She placed them beside the trench and said, "My husband died waiting for rain. Build this so our children don't." The men ate in silence and kept digging. By the fourth month, the trench began to change. The angles sharpened, the banks held. Engineers checked the levels with old theodolites, marking every rise and fall by hand. When the first test gate opened, a low sound echoed through the valley, water moving over dry stone for the first time in years. No one spoke. Some smiled, some crossed themselves, and one soldier took off his cap and dipped it into the flow. The work of thousands had found its voice. But as the current spread, messages began to cross the border, reports, questions, warnings. Some wondered how a small country had managed what others had postponed for decades. Others asked a quieter question. If Burkina Faso could build without permission, what else might it do? The water reached the fields at dawn. By nightfall, the first cables left foreign embassies. Phrases repeated across capitals: off-budget risk, non-compliant, governance exposure. A canal had become a file. Numbers followed the words. Credit lines tightened by a fraction that only bankers notice. Insurance quotes for heavy equipment crept up. A shipment of pump parts sat under review at a port that never needed reviews before. Nothing dramatic. Everything deliberate. Headlines arrived in neat order. Symbol over substance. Populist engineering. Unsustainable without partners. Anonymous experts explained evaporation rates and silt loads to readers who would never see the Sahel. Maps colored the canal in warning red. Inside Ouagadougou, the pressure was quieter. A friendly delegation suggested technical assistance, the kind that travels with conditions. A consultant offered to optimize water governance. 4 words that often mean new signatures in foreign offices. A draft memorandum appeared with phrases about best practices and fiscal anchors. The price of help was a key. On the line crews, nothing changed. Men checked gates before sunrise. Women logged flows in school notebooks. Young technicians learned the sound of a bearing that will fail 3 days early. The work kept its rhythm because the fields did not care about memos. There were other messages. A market rumor that the canal would divert funds from schools. A whisper that a second phase was already corrupt. One night, a survey stake line was pulled out along a future extension. By morning, it was set again. Security tightened around the control house. Lights stayed on later. Routes shifted. Not because of war, but because of the kind of pressure that never wears a uniform. In the council room, maps lay open. Maintenance lists ran long. Dredging crews, spare impellers, fuel buffers for drought years. No foreign flag on the paper, only the arithmetic of keeping water honest. Beyond the city, the harvest calendar bent. Planting dates moved forward. Cattle trails shifted toward new troughs. A line of tomatoes reached a market that used to run empty by noon. Small changes, ordinary to the eye, heavy in the ledger. The question grew without being asked. If a country can keep a canal alive under pressure, what else might it keep? By the end of the first growing season, the canal had altered more than the fields. It had rearranged the rhythm of daily life. In the villages, women no longer walked before dawn to fetch water. They rose later, washed clothes near home, and planted gardens that survived the long, dry months. Children followed them to the banks, tossing stones into the flow where the ground had once split open. Trucks began to appear on roads that had been silent for years. They carried onions, grain, and cement, small proofs that motion had returned. A few traders reopened warehouses sealed since the last drought. In the capital, the price of bread fell for the first time in memory. No one called it a miracle. They called it work that finally mattered. Inside the ministries, the air shifted. Budgets that once waited for donors now had to answer to farmers. Officials heard new questions. If water could be built without the IMF, why not power, or roads, or schools? Each success of the canal was a quiet accusation against dependency. Every liter that flowed through Burkina gates was proof that foreign permission had never been a law of nature. Yet the victories carried weight. Maintenance crews worked past exhaustion. Fuel bills climbed. Machinists in local workshops learned to mill spare parts by hand because imports stalled at the port. Each breakthrough revealed another missing skill. The government started training new welders, pump operators, and engineers in schools where chalk still outlasted electricity. Progress came, but without comfort. Abroad, the project became a case study. Editorials praised its spirit of self-reliance. Policy memos warned of ideological risk. Diplomatic language softened what they meant. If one nation could do this alone, others might try. Rumors grew. A clause about privatization appeared in a leaked draft of a regional agreement. A mining firm expressed interest in partnership opportunities along the canal's southern reach. Both were denied, but the question stayed open. In the fields, the flow continued. Wheat rose where dust had ruled. Families ate together beside the banks, the night air filled with the sound of running water instead of wind. What had begun as a trench was now something larger, proof, challenge, and warning at once. The canal gave them water. What will it cost to keep it? In the weeks after the opening, cables moved quietly between embassies. They spoke of regional shifts, non-aligned finance, unverified capacity. Each phrase meant the same thing. A small nation had done what the larger ones had warned against. It had built without permission. In Washington, analysts compared the figures to past projects backed by the IMF. Their numbers didn't add up. No interest owed, no donor oversight, no clause for future control. In the silence between reports lay the unease that money had lost its leverage. Neighboring governments sent observers under polite names, technical missions, academic exchanges. They walked the banks, photographed sluice gates, measured gradients, and left without comment. Back home, they faced the same question their hosts had already answered. How long can a country live without borrowed certainty? Markets felt the ripple first. Traders noticed a shift in grain routes as Burkina Faso began exporting modest harvests eastward. No announcement was made, yet global indexes adjusted. When a region feeds itself, someone else sells less. Security briefings changed their tone. Where once the Sahel had been described as ungoverned space, new maps showed stable corridors along the canal's reach. Work crews now guarded levees where patrols once failed. Men who might have carried rifles were earning by the hour. The water had done what weapons could not. It gave purpose. Still, not everyone saw progress. Some foreign newspapers called the project a nationalist display. Policy centers spoke of authoritarian development, the same words used for any effort that succeeds without their supervision. A few diplomats warned that independence, if left unchecked, might become an example. Inside Burkina Faso, few cared what the reports said. The water kept its course. The first grain rose heavy in the heads, bending the stalks under its own weight. It was a good season, and a nervous one. For every harvest gathered from the canal's edge, another kind of reckoning approached. Slower, quieter, harder to measure. The first harvest will show whether this canal grows crops or consequences. The dry season came again, but the canal did not fade. Its waters held their line through dust and heat, a narrow band of silver across the red plain. From above, it looked like a thread stitching the land back together, north to south, hope to hunger. In Ouagadougou, the second phase began. Not just expansion, but connection. New branches were planned toward the borders, designed to link with river systems in Niger and Mali. The engineers spoke of flow rates and retention basins. What they were really describing was unity. For the first time in generations, nations once divided by debt and drought were beginning to think in the same direction, downstream. Beyond Burkina Faso, farmers listened. They heard of water that stayed, of harvests that no lender could claim. Some sent letters asking for blueprints. Others sent their sons to learn how the work was done. What began as a single canal was turning into an idea that could cross frontiers more easily than pipelines or armies. Pressure from abroad softened to silence. Markets adjusted. Aid programs shifted their language from control to cooperation. The change was slow but steady, like the current itself. And beneath it all ran the same quiet truth. Once people learn they can build with their own hands, they do not unlearn it. At dusk, the fields glowed. Green spread where only sand had lived. Children played by the banks, their laughter echoing over the hum of pumps. The air smelled of clay, grain, and rain carried from far away. The old men who had dug the first trenches said the same thing. This is only the beginning. Across Africa, maps will redraw themselves not by conquest or borders, but by the reach of shared water. Each canal, each dam, each reclaimed acre will mark a point of return, for dignity, for trust, for life itself. The Sahel may one day read like a single field, tended by many nations, watered by their own courage. The river that began in Burkina Faso will not stop. It will move through the continent the way truth moves through silence. Slow, certain, impossible to turn back. And when it reaches the sea, the world will remember where it started. A line in the dust, carved by hands that believed freedom should flow.